Daniel adjusted his grip on the steering wheel, the worn leather pressing into his palms. His car idled at the edge of the driveway, the old sedan humming softly, as if hesitating along with him. The house behind him stood in eerie silence, its peeling white paint catching in the dim morning light. The weight in his chest tightened. Was this really it? His breath fogged up the windshield. He wiped it with his sleeve, as if clearing his own uncertainty. The roads stretched ahead, veiled in early morning mist, but that wasn't what unsettled him. It was knowing that once he left, there was no taking it back. A car passed in the distance, tires crunching over damp asphalt. Its red taillights faded into the fog. Just go, he told himself. The night before played in his mind like a film on loop. Marianne's voice, steady but soft, had carried through the phone, cracking only once when she said the names. Taylor, Morgan, Riley, his children. He had laughed at first, a cold, nervous laugh, as if she had told him the punchline to a joke he'd forgotten. Then she bit back, words sharp and unforgiving, words that carved a hollow space in him that hadn't left since, "They're yours, Daniel. You don't get to laugh about this." A part of him wished she'd screamed, maybe cursed at him for disappearing the way he did, drifting through life as though responsibility was something other people had to face. Instead, her voice had been distant, tired, like years of waiting for him to be someone she knew he never would be, except now. He was forced to be. He looked at the house again, the only home he'd ever known. The porch steps sagged in the middle. His mother's old garden had long since been strangled by weeds. Every time he came back, it was the same. Ghosts of old memories clinging to the walls, reminders of the boy who had once dreamed of leaving and never looking back. But this was different. This time, he wasn't leaving a house. He was leaving 3 children. His phone sat face up on the dashboard, the last call staring back at him. Marianne. 2:14 a.m. She hadn't asked him to stay, hadn't begged him to finally be the father they needed. Maybe because she already knew the answer. The engine's hum filled the silence. Just go. Daniel swallowed hard, shifted the car into drive, and rolled onto the road. The town disappeared behind, him in the rearview mirror. 2 hours later, the road stretched endlessly ahead. Fields of dull gold blurred past, autumn winds bending the brittle stalks of wheat. The radio murmured an old folk song, low and melancholic, but Daniel barely registered it. His knuckles were white against the steering wheel. His jaw ached from clenching it. The interstate was nearly empty, save for the occasional pickup truck laden with equipment or lone sedans slicing through the mist. He could go anywhere now. No plan, no destination, just away. His phone buzzed on the dashboard. 10 minutes passed before he glanced down. One new message. Marianne. I won't stop you, but they'll ask about you. I won't lie to them. Daniel exhaled sharply. His hand hovered over the phone, contemplating a reply. What could he even say? I'm sorry. I didn't know. I'm too scared to be what they need. He turned the phone face down and pressed harder on the accelerator. Outrunning guilt wasn't so easy. The town awoke slowly under the weight of early autumn. Willow Creek had always looked the same. Modest homes with porches weathered by decades of storms. A diner on Main Street where voices hummed against the clatter of coffee cups. The local grocery, where the staff still knew customers by name. But it wasn't the town that had changed. It was the people. Marianne stood in her small kitchen, the steam rising from her coffee curling into the soft morning light. Outside, the garden trembled in the cold breeze, its flowers resilient against the threatening chill of winter. She ran a fingertip along the rim of her cup, absently watching the sun pull itself over the rooftops. Taylor's footsteps echoed down the hallway. I'm leaving for school, her voice carried, flat and unreadable. Marianne turned. Taylor's backpack was slung over one shoulder. Her hair, hastily tied back, left loose strands framing. Her face. She looked so much older than she should have. I'll drive you, Marianne offered. Taylor shook her head, already stepping toward the door. Taylor. She hesitated, hand gripping the doorknob. Marianne took a slow breath, weighing her words. "If you want to talk." "I don't," Taylor cut in. Not unkindly, just tired. "Mom, I already know what you're going to say." Marianne held her gaze, searching for the cracks beneath her daughter's carefully constructed walls. There was anger there, but deeper than that, uncertainty, hurt. Taylor didn't say it outright, but Marianne knew what she was thinking. He left again. No dramatic goodbye, no explanation, just like before. She swallowed the lump in her throat. "Okay," she murmured. "I'll see you after school." Taylor nodded, then disappeared out the door. Marianne turned back to her coffee, the warmth of the cup grounding her. "I won't stop you, but they'll ask about you." She had meant every word. Morgan sat curled in the worn armchair by the window, a book balanced on her knees. Her gaze flickered across the pages, though Marianne knew she wasn't entirely absorbed in reading. "You okay?" Marianne asked, sitting beside her. Morgan shrugged, a classic response. No eye contact, no unnecessary words. Marianne studied her middle child, the one who had always been the hardest to read. Where Taylor held fire and Riley still clung to hope, Morgan folded into herself, unreachable, as if closing the door to protect something fragile inside. "I know you don't like talking about these things," she said softly. "But, I don't need to talk," Morgan interrupted. Not harsh, just distant. She tapped a thumb against the book's spine, a quiet rhythm filling the silence. Marianne sighed. Always the same battle. She squeezed Morgan's knee gently before rising. "Breakfast is on the table." Morgan didn't answer, but Marianne caught the slow nod as she walked away. In the backyard, Riley knelt in the dirt, tracing his fingers through the soil. "Be careful with that one," Marianne said as she stepped onto the porch, watching him inspect a wilting tomato vine. Riley looked up, his expression unreadable. "Do you think he's coming back?" The soft way he asked it made something tighten in her chest. She sat on the top step. "I don't know, honey." Riley continued studying the wilted leaves. Finally, he sighed. "If you don't know, then I guess I don't either." He wasn't angry, wasn't resentful the way Taylor was, but he wasn't a child anymore either. For the first time that morning, Marianne was sure of something. She wasn't going to make excuses for Daniel. Not this time. The smell of old books and worn leather filled the small-town library, where dust motes floated lazily in the slanted morning light. It had always been quiet here, too quiet for most, but that was exactly why Morgan came. She preferred the corners, places where no one thought to look. Today, she was tucked into the farthest table, shelves looming around her like protective walls. Notes were spread out in front of her, and an open book rested by her side, though she had barely read more than a page. A noise at the entrance made her stiffen. Liam, the librarian, peeked his head between the shelves, his graying eyebrows lifting in familiarity. "Didn't take a detective to guess you'd be in here." Morgan exhaled, forcing a small smile. Liam had worked at the library for as long as she could remember. When she was younger, he'd let her stay past closing on slow nights, trusting her to put everything back in its rightful place. "I like my quiet corners," she murmured, tapping her pen against the table. Liam chuckled. "And here I was, thinking maybe you were actually socializing with kids your own age." Morgan smirked, but didn't look up from her notes. Liam's expression softened. "Taylor told me your dad came back, or—" He hesitated, then cleared his throat. "Tried to. Anyhow." Morgan's grip on her pen tightened. Liam sighed, as if realizing he had pushed too far. "I'll leave you to it," he said, stepping back. "Let me know if you need anything." As soon as he disappeared, Morgan let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She wasn't sure what she had expected from her father, but she knew better than to expect this awkward mess of unfinished apologies and half-hearted attempts. He had always come and gone as he pleased. Why should this time be any different? Taylor had been furious. Riley had pretended like nothing happened. And Morgan. She just buried herself deeper in her books. It was easier that way. Pulling out her journal, she flipped to the last entry she had written, hesitated, then scrawled out a single line beneath it. You can't miss someone who was never really there. She exhaled sharply, then snapped the book shut. Across town, Taylor walked home from school with slow, measured steps. Her boots scraped against the sidewalk, the autumn air crisp against her face. Normally, she walked with friends, but today, she found herself alone. Maybe on purpose. Her grip tightened around the straps of her backpack. 2 days. That's how long it had been since Daniel left again. She wanted to be surprised. She wanted to be shocked. But she wasn't, not even a little. When she had come home last night, Marianne had been in the kitchen just standing there, her hands resting on the counter, staring at nothing. She hadn't even noticed Taylor at first. "Mom?" Marianne had blinked, then shaken her head, forcing a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Sorry, just tired." Taylor had nodded but said nothing. They were all tired. A car honked nearby, jolting her from her thoughts. She quickened her pace, turning the last corner toward their house. Riley was sitting on the porch steps. When she arrived, his knees pulled to his chest. "You're home late," he murmured. Taylor shrugged, setting her bag down with a thud. "Had stuff to do." Riley let out a small hum, the kind that usually meant "I don't believe you, but I won't push." They sat in silence for a few long moments. Then, out of nowhere, he asked, "Do you think he really left because of us?" Taylor inhaled, sharply, caught off guard by the question. Before she could respond, Riley lifted his head, his expression unreadable. "Would you want him back? If he really came back this time?" Taylor swallowed. "I don't know." "Yeah," Riley muttered, looking away. "Me neither." And for now, that was enough. Daniel sat in his car outside Marianne's house, hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The house looked the same porch steps, the same cracked walkway leading to the door, the same life he had walked out of. Through the window, he could see a faint silhouette moving around inside. Maybe it was Marianne. Maybe it was one of the kids. His stomach twisted. After everything, did he even deserve to be here? The trip back hadn't been planned. He had lasted 48 hours before realizing he was just running in circles. Same old motel rooms, same gas station coffee, same hollow feeling clinging to his ribs. The guilt had settled in like a stone, refusing to budge no matter how many miles he put between him and Willow Creek. So, he turned around, because even if they didn't want him here, even if they slammed the door in his face, he needed to at least try. He grabbed the handle, hesitated, then forced himself out of the car. The walk to the front door felt like wading through wet cement. Before he could knock, the door swung open. Marianne stood in the threshold, arms crossed, expression unreadable. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, she exhaled. "You're not very good at disappearing, are you?" Daniel forced a dry chuckle. "Turns out, I'm not good at a lot of things." Something flickered in her eyes. Annoyance, exhaustion, maybe something else entirely. With a sigh, she stepped aside. "Come inside." The kitchen smelled like coffee and something faintly sweet, maybe cinnamon. It felt almost painfully familiar. Daniel shifted awkwardly near the doorway, unsure where to stand. Marianne tossed him a glance as she set a mug on the counter. "I'm not going to ask why you're here," she said, reaching for her own coffee. "I figure you wouldn't even know how to answer that." Daniel swallowed. I just needed to come back," Marianne hummed, unimpressed. "And that's different from before." He ran a hand through his hair. "I don't know." She sighed. Honest answer, at least. Across the room, the sound of the front door opening made them both pause. Footsteps. Then, Taylor's voice, sharp and unforgiving. "What the hell is he doing here?" Daniel turned just in time to see her standing at the entrance of the kitchen, her expression furious. His stomach dropped. "Taylor," Marianne said warningly. Taylor took a shaking breath, her hands clenched into fists. "No. Mom, no, this isn't happening. He doesn't get to just show up like nothing happened." Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came out. Taylor let out a dry, bitter laugh. "Unbelievable. She turned on her heel and stormed toward the stairs. "Taylor, wait!" A door slammed shut. Silence. Daniel stared after her, throat tight. Marianne rubbed her temples. That went about as well as you could have expected. Daniel dragged a hand over his face. "I shouldn't have come." Marianne shot him a look. "Maybe not. But you're here now, so figure out what the hell you plan to do about it." Daniel exhaled shakily, staring down at his hands. For the first time, he really wasn't sure. The house felt different with Daniel inside it. The air was thick, too thick, as if the walls themselves resisted his presence. The kitchen, once filled with the everyday routine of Marianne, and the kids, now carried an unmistakable weight. Marianne sat at the table, scrolling idly through her phone. Though Daniel could tell she wasn't reading anything, her brows furrowed slightly. Her posture just stiff enough to let him know she was thinking too much. Probably about whether or not she regretted letting him in the door. He hadn't moved from his spot near the counter. Didn't know where to move. Taylor's furious exit still echoed upstairs, the rumbling of distant footsteps signaling that Riley and Morgan had likely heard the whole thing, probably whispering about what the hell their father was doing back this time. Daniel swallowed hard. "Should I?" "Give her space," Marianne interrupted, still not looking at him. Daniel exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. "I didn't think it would be easy, but—" He leaned against the counter. "I don't know. I wasn't expecting that," Marianne scoffed. "You abandoned them, Daniel. Taylor especially." She finally glanced up, but her gaze wasn't soft. It was sharp, matter-of-fact. "You don't get to act surprised that she doesn't want you here." The bluntness cut more than he expected. He nodded, accepting the hit. "I know." A pause. I don't want to leave again. I want to stay this time." Marianne didn't react at first. Then she leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "And what happens when it gets too hard? When they don't forgive you right away? Are you gonna run again when it's not convenient?" Daniel flinched but didn't look away. "I don't know," he admitted, voice low. "But I want to try, and if it takes forever for them to believe that, then that's on me." Something unreadable flickered in Marianne's eyes. She didn't trust him yet. Of course she didn't. But maybe she wasn't completely shutting the door, either. After a long moment, she sighed. "This isn't going to get solved in one conversation." Daniel nodded. "I know." "Then stop lingering in my kitchen like a stranded tourist." She gestured toward the living room. "If you want to stay, you're going to have to face them sooner or later." Daniel hesitated. "Go," Marianne said, softer this time. "They're in the living room." The floor creaked as Daniel stepped inside. He expected silence, or maybe glares, but what he got was worse. Neither Morgan nor Riley looked up right away. Riley sat with his legs folded under him, absently flipping through an old photo album, his fingers tracing the edges of a picture. Morgan was next. To him, arms crossed as she leaned into the couch cushions, flipping idly through a book. Her expression was unreadable, as usual. Daniel cleared his throat. "Hey." Morgan flicked her eyes toward him, unimpressed. "Hey." Riley turned the page without looking up. Daniel studied them both, desperate for any sign of ease. But all he found were walls. Some high, some low, but all of them there. "You still read all the time, huh?" Daniel said, glancing at Morgan's book. Morgan blinked. "Oh, wow. A personality trait you remember." Her tone was cool, unimpressed. "Right. He deserved that." "I guess I deserve that." She smirked, but it wasn't warm. "At least we agree on something." Riley shifted slightly, finally looking up, though barely. "Why'd you come back?" Daniel exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Because I needed to." Riley frowned. "That's not an answer." "You're right," Daniel admitted. He sat down, though too far away to force anything uncomfortable. "I came back because I made a mistake. A huge mistake." He swallowed. "And I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even expect you to want me here, but I don't want to disappear again." Morgan stared, expression carefully blank. "And yet, You did. Daniel flinched. Riley bit his lip. What are you even planning to do? Just hang around and pretend everything's fine? No, Daniel said firmly. Nothing about this is fine, and I wouldn't expect that. He shook his head. I just want to figure out how to be something in your lives. Even if you hate me, even if you don't trust me, I'd rather be the guy trying to fix it than the guy running away from it. Morgan stared at him for a long time. Then, I don't hate you, she said. Voice quiet. Daniel startled slightly. She shrugged. But I don't trust you. Fair enough. Riley's grip on the photo album tightened. He didn't say anything else, but something shifted, almost imperceptibly, like he was still keeping a wall up, but maybe peeking over it. Small steps. Later that evening, Daniel found himself in a place he never thought he'd return to. The community center smelled exactly the same: coffee, old wood, and the faintest hint of lemon cleaning solution beneath everything else. He sat quietly in the back, watching from a distance as Marianne moved through the space with practiced ease. The support group she had started wasn't large, maybe a dozen people, but something about them felt solid. They listened. They spoke only when necessary. No judgment, no forced advice, just truth. Daniel wasn't supposed to be here. Not really. But he had followed Marianne, intent on proving that he was serious about sticking around. She hadn't argued, just raised an eyebrow and told him he'd better listen. So he sat. Taylor arrived halfway through the session, a journal tucked under her arm. She froze when she saw him. For a long, heavy moment, neither of them spoke. Then, slowly, she made her way to an empty chair, on the opposite side of the room. Yeah. He expected that. Marianne gestured toward Taylor. Would you like to share? Taylor hesitated. Then, gripping her journal just a little too tightly, she nodded. Her voice was even as she opened it, but Daniel could hear the tension beneath it. I used to have dreams about finding you, she said without preamble. When I was younger. Her eyes burned into Daniel's. Before dropping back to the page, I used to think maybe you got lost. Maybe you didn't even know we existed. Like it was some kind of big misunderstanding. She laughed, but it was bitter. Now I just think you didn't care enough to stay. Daniel clenched, his fists. Don't interrupt. Let her talk. Taylor inhaled sharply. I don't know if I even want an apology at this point. I don't know what we're supposed to do next, and I don't trust you not to leave again. She snapped the book shut. That's all. Marianne nodded, giving her a soft look. Thank you for sharing. Taylor didn't respond. She just folded into herself, arms crossed tightly as if she could physically hold herself together. Daniel exhaled, staring down at his hands. She had every right to feel like that. Every single right. But he wasn't leaving, this time. And whether or not they ever wanted to believe it, he was going to prove it. One way or another, it started small. So small he barely noticed at first. The tension in the house didn't disappear overnight. Daniel knew better than to expect that. But there were moments, tiny, quiet instances, that suggested maybe, just maybe, things weren't as hopeless as they seemed. Like when Morgan didn't immediately leave the room when he entered, or when Riley almost smiled at one of his stupid jokes at dinner. Even if Taylor still refused to have a real conversation with him, she at least acknowledged he existed. That had to count for something. Marianne noticed it too. She wasn't quick with praises, but she also hadn't asked him to leave. That alone felt like the closest thing to approval he would get. And so, Daniel stayed. He didn't try to force anything. He just existed in the space, hoping that mattered. On a brisk Saturday afternoon, Marianne finally invited him to stay for dinner. It didn't sound like an invitation at first, more like a challenge. If you're serious about staying, then sit at the table like a normal person for once, she said, handing him a plate. Daniel glanced toward the dining room where the kids were already seated. You sure they won't mind? Marianne just gave him a look, the kind that said, you want to be here? Then act like it. He hesitated, then took the plate and walked in. The second he sat down, the tension crackled through the air. Taylor stabbed at her food aggressively. Morgan barely looked up. Riley paused mid-bite, as if he had just registered that Daniel wasn't sitting somewhere else this time. Daniel cleared his throat. "Smells good," he said, which was true. The food looked way better than anything he had been living off in his motel. "Flattery won't make it taste better," Marianne muttered, but he caught the small smirk she tried to hide. They ate in silence for a few minutes. Then, surprisingly, it was Riley who spoke first. "I thought you were bad at cooking," he said, setting his fork down. Daniel blinked. I am." Riley tilted. His head. "Then how'd you survive?" "An actual challenge." Daniel scratched the back of his neck. "Mostly diners, and terrible gas station sandwiches." "That's disgusting," Taylor grumbled, but there was something less sharp in her voice. "Yeah, well," he shrugged. "Turns out avoiding responsibilities doesn't come with a good meal plan." Morgan snorted at that. A quick, involuntary sound, but it was something. Daniel almost smiled. He glanced toward Taylor, who was still very much guarded. He wasn't expecting miracles tonight, but if he could just hold his ground, not push, not force anything, maybe. One day, the anger in her eyes would soften. When dinner finished, he started gathering plates, but Marianne casually waved him off. "You're still on probation? Go sit down." Daniel chuckled, actually chuckled, and shook his head as he stepped back. It wasn't a victory. Not yet, but it felt like the first real step forward. Later that night, Daniel stood on the porch, leaning against the wooden railing, watching the stars blink to life. Something felt different. Not relief exactly, but a sense of possibility. The screen door creaked behind him. Taylor. Of all people. Daniel straightened slightly. "Hey." Taylor crossed her arms. "Don't get comfortable just because you sat at a dinner table. Right to the point." Daniel sighed, running a hand over his face. "Taylor, I don't trust you," she interrupted. "And I don't want to trust you." He exhaled sharply, nodding. "I know." Taylor's jaw clenched. "But Riley and Morgan..." She hesitated. "They're different. They might actually give you a chance." Daniel swallowed. "And you won't." She stared at him, something stormy in her expression. "I don't know." Her honesty stung more than her anger. "But," she added, exhaling, "I guess even bad parents deserve a chance. To try." Daniel's breath caught. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But maybe, for tonight, it was enough. The weeks that followed felt strange. Not bad. Not great. Just new. Willow Creek still carried the same routine. But the way Daniel fit into it had changed. He wasn't just some ghost floating around the edges of their lives anymore. He was trying, and, slowly, they were letting him. Not without difficulty, not without hesitation, but letting him nonetheless. One afternoon, Riley burst through the door, sketchbook tucked under his arm, practically vibrating with excitement. "Mom, Morgan, look!" He flipped open the pages. Daniel and Marianne both paused. Riley hesitated, just a split second, before shyly angling the book toward Daniel too, as if it had been an accident, but maybe not quite. The drawing was detailed, delicate. Watercolor hues merged into soft sketches, a mix of past and present. A house, a garden, a swing set slightly run down but still standing. Daniel tilted his head. "Is that us?" Riley shrugged, suddenly looking really interested in the floorboards. "I guess." Morgan leaned over to look. "Damn, Riley. You really went all out for the emotional sucker punch." "Language," Marianne said absently, but her own voice was just a little softer than usual. Daniel stared at the painting, something catching in his throat. "It's really good, kid." Riley didn't respond, but his ears went red, which, for him, might as well have been a full confession of satisfaction. Then there was Morgan. Daniel didn't push her, but he noticed things. She left books out on purpose now, spines cracked open on topics he knew she wanted to discuss if she could just stop being stubborn for 2 seconds. So one afternoon, he casually glanced at a book left open on the kitchen counter. A psychological study on memory retention, huh? Morgan shifted. Yeah. Daniel tapped the page. I read something once about how scent plays a huge role in memory. Morgan raised an eyebrow. You read. Well, Daniel admitted, sighing dramatically. Only when I wasn't busy making terrible life choices. Morgan actually laughed. Just briefly, but it happened. Progress. And Taylor? Well, Taylor still held back. But sometimes, if he was careful, she answered his questions with more than just glares. And that was enough. For now. The real test came when Daniel got an idea. A barbecue. Nothing big, just them. The closest thing to a normal family moment they had ever had. Marianne narrowed her eyes when he suggested it. You're getting bold, Daniel grinned, forcing confidence. Figured why not? Worst case scenario. Taylor murders me with a pair of tongs. Marianne snorted. You joke, but she's probably considered it. Despite the concern, she agreed, encouraged it, even. So, on a cool Sunday afternoon, they gathered, in the backyard. Taylor didn't roll her eyes at him the whole time. Morgan made sarcastic comments, but they were playful this time. Riley laughed. And Daniel? He grilled burgers that were way too burnt, and let them roast him for it like he actually belonged there. Because maybe, just maybe, he finally did. That night, Daniel stepped onto the porch, inhaling deeply. This wasn't perfect. Would never be perfect. But it was something. Beside him, Marianne sighed. Don't mess this up. Daniel nodded, staring at the stars. I won't. And this time, he meant it. The seasons shifted gently in Willow Creek, each change bringing with it a sense of quiet renewal. The town, with its familiar routines and steadfast traditions, seemed to breathe easier, as if the collective weight of the past had finally begun to lift. Daniel stood on Marianne's porch, watching the fields stretch out under the soft glow of early evening. The horizon was a blend of warm hues, a reminder that even after the darkest days, there was always the promise of light. He had become a steady presence here, no longer a ghost, but a part of the fabric of their lives. It wasn't always easy. There were still moments of tension, still days when the past felt just a little too close. But those moments were becoming fewer, and the days of quiet understanding were growing. Taylor's journal had evolved from pages filled with anger and confusion to a mature narrative of their journey. She still held her guard, but there were cracks in her walls, allowing glimpses of the trust that was slowly being rebuilt. She had started sharing her writing at local gatherings, her voice carrying the weight of their shared story and the strength of her resilience. Morgan's essays had become a beacon of insight in the community. She spoke at local events, her words a delicate balance between heartbreak and the beauty of new beginnings. People listened, drawn to her quiet strength and the wisdom she had gained through their shared experiences. Riley's art had flourished, his sketches and watercolors capturing the essence of their journey. Each piece was a blend of past and present, a testament to the delicate miracle of mending a fractured past. His work was displayed at local markets and community events, a visual narrative of hope and renewal. Marianne watched over it all with a quiet pride. Each small step toward healing was a victory over the losses of the past. She had become the anchor, the steady force that held them all together. One sunny afternoon, Daniel hosted a modest barbecue at Marianne's house. The aroma of grilled vegetables mingled with laughter and conversation, the lingering chill of isolation dispelled by the warmth of their shared moments. Neighbors, once cautious onlookers, now gathered closer. Each shared anecdote and genuine smile a celebration of a family learning to grow again. As the seasons shifted, new traditions emerged. Quiet Sunday walks, spontaneous visits to the local diner, and the reawakening of long-forgotten songs filled their days. Although the scars of abandonment were not erased, they became weathered. Marks on a canvas being slowly repainted with hope, forgiveness, and the promise of a future crafted together. In the soft glow of early evening, Daniel often sat on the porch, watching the fields stretch out toward the horizon. The hard choices of yesteryear had seeded a landscape where resilience, honest reflection, and found forgiveness began to take root. Taylor's once tormented journal had evolved into a mature narrative, a testimony to the power of facing one's emotions head-on. Morgan's thoughtful essays had become beacons of insight in local gatherings, speaking to the delicate balance between heartbreak and the beauty of new beginnings. And Riley's art, vibrant and delicate, captured the quiet miracle of mending a fractured past. At local markets, community events, and small farmers' gatherings, every shared smile and gentle nod echoed the collective truth of Willow Creek. Though wounds may never completely fade, they pave the way for reclamation, rebuilding, and ultimately, redemption. Marianne watched over it all with a quiet pride. Each small step toward renewal, a silent victory over the losses of the past. As dusk settled gently over the small town, the enduring spirit of its people shone, like scattered stars in the twilight. Daniel, Taylor, Morgan, Riley, Marianne, and every resident of Willow Creek had learned that while the past cannot be undone, its lessons can light the way for a future built on understanding, shared strength, and the indomitable promise of second chances. In the quiet, knowing embrace of night, the story of a family's redemption merged with the timeless narrative of life, a reminder that every ending can be the start of something beautifully new. What did you think of the story? Leave a comment and a review about this story. If you were moved and enjoyed our work, feel free to help us continue producing. I invite you to click on our link in the first pinned comment. Now, 2 buttons will appear. One to subscribe if you haven't already, and the other to watch other interesting stories. Choose one. Thank you for watching this far. See you soon.